Lori Mihalich Levin believes in empowering working parents. She is the founder and CEO of Mindful Return, author of Back to Work After Baby: How to Plan and Navigate a Mindful Return from Maternity Leave, and she's a co-host of the Parents at Work podcast. She is mom to two wonderful redheaded boys, yay redheads, aged 9,
Yay.
11, and is a healthcare lawyer in private practice. Her thought leadership has been featured in publications like Forbes, Washington Post, New York Times Parenting, Thrive Global, and the Huffington Post. Lori, welcome to Hustle and Grace.
Hillary, I am so honored to be here. Thank you for having me. Thanks for the invitation, and go Redheads. Yes.
Yes, go Team Redheads. I'm so excited to have you. I have so many questions for you. So let's just start off. I'm so excited to have you here. I was introduced to your work through a DC area new parents Facebook group. You're also located in the DC area, which is so fun. And when I found your book, I was like, oh my goodness, this is the book I need. It's all about how to thoughtfully and strategically step away from work when you're having a baby, and then thoughtfully and strategically like emerging and reintegrating into work after you have that child. So I'm curious if you could unpack exactly what, mindful return is, holistically, and then how the idea originated for you.
Right. That's an excellent question. And I think I can weave those 2 points together by saying that mindful return is a movement I created out of sheer desperation when returning to work myself after parental leave and finding so few high quality resources on how to navigate this personal and professional identity transition in a way that was helpful and meaningful and not snarky and ridiculous. So when I had my two boys, this was again 9 and 11 years ago, so now I'm a decade into parenthood, I returned to work full time after parental leave. I'm a lawyer and I was in a healthcare policy role at the time. And I found all sorts of snarky advice, Hillary. I found how to, the idea that you shouldn't put your child's picture on your desk or people might not take you seriously. I found advice
Wow.
about the fact that you might leak on your shirt if you're pumping and breastfeeding. And I didn't find any of that particularly helpful. And so my goal was to develop both high quality content and a really supportive and connected community of people who were all transitioning back around the same time, so that people didn't feel alone, didn't feel like they were, completely lost and overwhelmed. I spent way too much time crying on the kitchen floor, not knowing how on earth I was going to make any of this happen. And I wanted to have give other people the chance to avoid that situation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So did it start with the community building, those groups, the connecting groups, or did you start with the writing, or did it all kind of happen together?
Yeah. So the very first thing that I did when I started to recognize my own sense of isolation and despair and also I recognized that other parents at my same workplace were coming into my office, shutting the door, bursting into tears, saying, why is this so hard? And so the very first thing I did was build a community at my place of employment. So I, since then, have become sort of a serial founder of working parent groups at offices. But the very first one that I founded was at this nonprofit healthcare trade association where I was working. And I created what I then called the Returning to Work community, which was basically parents of kids under 5 who were all sort of going through this transition to parenthood. And then to get myself out of a really dark place, I decided to sign up for an online course that at the time was called the Abundant Mama Project. And it was this woman named Shawn Fink in Pennsylvania, and she was bringing together moms from all over the world, all different like ages and stages of life, who are all trying to find the abundance in life instead of the overwhelm. And I took this online course. It centered me, it grounded me, it made me feel not alone. And I said to my husband, somebody needs to create this same concept of an online course and community, but for the transition back to work after parental leave. And my dear entrepreneurial husband, who has an MBA, and I'm the risk averse lawyer who doesn't even think of these things, he's like, well, what are you going to do about it? And so I sat on, I still remember like the green bedspread on the king size bed that I was sitting on. And I opened up my laptop and I was like, I'm going to write a blog post. I don't know why this was terrifying, but my hands were shaking. Of course, no one even saw that first blog post, or like 5 people saw it. But when you first start, you're sort of terrified to begin. So I started by blogging, then I developed a course, and then the book. And then, I mean, it just sort of has
It's just
snowballed from there.
grown from there. I love that. So what's interesting to me is not only are you kind of an expert from your own firsthand experience, but you've also over the years no doubt had so many conversations with people. You've done so much research around, what it means to move forward, both in your life as a parent and your life as a professional after you've had children. So I'm curious to know if you could boil it down to one piece of advice to parents who are looking at taking parental leave and then becoming working parents, or or going from one kid to two, because that kind of blew my mind.
1+1 is 85, Hillary.
Say that again.
1+1 is 85.
So, I mean,
Yeah.
it's so accurate and really surprised me. So, but what is your advice for parents who are trying to, they still have career goals, right? They still want to grow. They still have passions and things outside of raising these amazing little humans. What's your advice for that sort of stage of life?
Oh, can I give you 3 instead of 1?
Yes, please.
Okay. Number 1, the return to work is a period and an evolution. It is not an event. People think, oh, like after 1 week, if I'm feeling crappy and everything isn't settled and my baby's not sleeping, then I have failed at this return. No. It is a process. It is like a 1-year-long process of return. And I think to the extent you can set your expectations on that longer time scale, that can really help. Okay, so that's number 1. Number 2 is you are gaining amazing skills in parenthood that are useful in your career. I mean, I've got a whole week of the course on this, a whole chapter of the book, but let's flip on its head this narrative that somehow you are less than, you are less qualified, you are whatever, because you are a parent. And let's instead reflect on all the things that you are now better at because you're a parent, right? There's actually neuroscience research. Ruth Feldman out of Yale Medical School has discovered that the 1 year in the entire adult human experience when the brain is the most neuroplastic and can learn the most is that 1 year following the birth of one's child. So let's remember that we are learning amazing things. We are more efficient than ever. We prioritize better than ever. We have empathy skills like, we've never had before. We have the ability to meet the needs of demanding clients who can't articulate their needs very clearly. Let's talk about those skills that we're gaining through parenthood. Okay, so that's number 2. Let's focus on that. And then number 3 is experiment. Remember that nothing that you choose or decide has to be set in stone. I have people say, well, I don't know if I chose the perfect childcare or daycare. Who knows if you did or not, but experiment with it. If it works, great. If it doesn't, then move on. And I feel like if we can let go of the idea that whatever we pick for today has to be that perfect thing, then we can relieve a lot of the burden and stress on ourselves, that falls on us when we're being perfectionistic. With 2 kids in the house, I mean, it's just the Wild West. It's a chaotic jungle. There is no perfect. There is just experimenting and seeing what works today and then going with it as long as you can.
Absolutely. So there's a certain level of like, give yourself some grace
Yes.
in terms of the time, like make that and visualize that runway being much longer than you did at first. Grace to make changes, that nothing is permanent. That's all really encouraging to me. Another question for you. So something that sort of has surprised me as I've gone from 1 to 2. This is a very personalized interview. I hope that's okay.
Yes.
So something that's surprised me as I've gone from 1 kid to 2, and coupled with the fact that we were sort of in lockdown for COVID and then the world is opening back up, I find myself not just struggling with mom guilt per se, but I think I have mom FOMO. Like I don't want to miss out on anything with the kids. I don't want to miss out on anything with work. I also love to socialize. I also have creative interests and hobbies. So I kind of want to be everywhere all at once. Do you have any advice for how to move through that discomfort of missing out on milestones or even the mundane moments with your kids, but also missing out on, opportunities with work or opportunities in life otherwise, and kind of making peace with that?
Yeah. I'm pausing just to write a couple of notes because I have a lot of thoughts on this subject, Hillary, having been through it. I'll start off by saying that the hardest year of my entire life was my first year with 2 children. Maybe second only to the 15 straight months we spent at home with my elementary school age boys trying to teach them during the pandemic. Those 2 years sort of rival each other. So, I mean, just like deep breath, hats off, like it doesn't get more intense, I don't think, than that. Okay, so FOMO, milestones. Yeah, let's take each of these sort of in turn. Okay, so let's start with the milestones. I got a lot of the, oh my gosh, I'm going to miss the first time my baby does X, Y, or Z. And to that, I say, the first time is the time that you see it, right? So it only counts when you actually see it. And you can navigate conversations with your caregiver around the baby first so that you don't necessarily hear about them. So personal story, my babies both went to daycare. They were around 3.5, 4 months, whenever both of them started. And whenever our first son started, he came home from daycare a couple months into his stay there, and he sat at the kitchen table and he started clapping. And oh my gosh, we were so excited. We had never seen this kid clap before. We were taking video. We were calling grandma and grandpa, the whole works. And we went into daycare the next morning and we said, he learned how to clap. And they said, we know. And it didn't detract from my joy of seeing it, in part because I didn't know it was about to happen. They didn't tell me. They had a policy, although they didn't tell me about the policy of not telling people whenever first things happened, so there are ways to bring joy. Also, I like to use the analogy of if a tree falls in a forest and it doesn't make a sound, or if a tree, if a tree falls in a forest and nobody hears it, did it make a sound, right? Like your baby could learn to stand up in the crib at night, or while grandma's watching baby, or while you're in the bathroom, or any of those things. So it's not because you went back to work that you are missing it. Okay. So that's one thing. In terms of missing out, I like to focus more on what I am doing than what I am not, right? So every day I have a gratitude practice. I'm focusing on what did happen that brought me joy during the day. And my very, very favorite working parent quote of all time is Teddy Roosevelt's, "Comparison is the thief of joy." So what am I missing out on? Compared to what, right? Am I not advancing as fast as the guy next door in the office next door who's there around the clock? Maybe, but why am I comparing myself to him, right? So I think focusing on you do you and what your goals and your values are right now can help. We can't possibly meet everyone's expectations, including the expectations of ourselves all the time. We have a finite amount of time in the day. So let's prioritize that time and choose the things that are most important. The last thing I want to say with respect to, missing out and feeling like we want to be the ones doing everything is I do believe deeply that the maternal gatekeeping, which is the term for, mommy sort of blocking out other people and saying, no, I got this. I think it does us a disservice in the long run. And so I know, and I definitely did this myself, as a new parent, spent a lot of energy and time thinking I was the only one who could do X, Y, or Z. And even my husband couldn't or didn't need to do some of those things. And I think to the extent we can let go and say, it is better for me and it is better for my child when lots of people know how to do X, Y, Z, interact with child, all of those things, it frees up our own time. It frees up our own resources and our own energy. And, you can feel free to look up the term maternal gatekeeping, but it's a thing, and it's a thing we do. And I think it's something that we need to be more educated about, because I didn't have the terminology for it when I was a new parent. And so I didn't know I was doing it, and I didn't know it was hurting me.
Let me ask you this. Is there criteria in your mind for things that it's okay that mommy wants to do this certain thing? Like on Monday was my daughter's 1 year doctor's appointment checkup.
Yeah.
And I wanted to be there to discuss certain things with the doctor. I did have to take off of work that morning. I worked a little earlier and made up for it and, all the things.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, I didn't even sort of conference with my husband about who's going to take her for this. I just really wanted to do it. And I know in retrospect, he could have done it. It would have been fine. But for you, is there some sort of if you were to break it down, is there a way that you determine, okay, this makes sense for this to be mom's thing, or what's your perspective on that?
Yeah, there's a lot packed into that question, Hillary. For me, I try to center in, it's a lot of things, but one of them is, what am I genuinely enthusiastic about? What is my value? If my value is, I really want to be there for that 1-year-old appointment, then by all means, I don't think that there's a right or a wrong answer to what it is that you participate in. I do think that people don't necessarily get creative enough around that. And for example, there's a situation where, you've got the doctor's appointment, you're assuming that you're the one who's going to go because you want to be the one to ask the questions. And yet maybe it means like a commute way out of your way. And maybe it means like you're rescheduling everything. Meanwhile, it would have been potentially like practically easier for your partner to take the baby. There's video conference. There's like a way to participate even if you're not there. Another thing, I want to say two things, which are, my husband and I have a weekly Saturday meeting, hot date on the couch, where we go through the week and we talk about those priorities. And if something's coming up and I'm like, oh, I really want to do that with my kid, then we'll, arrange things. And maybe there's something he really wants to do with the kid that I could really care less about. And we'll talk about those things. So I think like that weekly communication with a partner is really key. And I'll just put a plug in for Eve Rodsky and her book, FairPlay, which is all about how we decide who's doing what. And every task has a CP&E, a conception, a planning, and an execution. And when one person holds all three of those, the world flows more smoothly. What we end up doing is delegating the execution, but holding on to the mental planning around the conception and the planning. And that's when things go awry. So just drop a nugget in there about that book. I know that wasn't specifically your question, but I think it's all packed into who does what and how do we talk about who does what.
Yes. That's so great. I recently listened to the audio version of her book, and it really got me thinking, because there is a lot of, I don't know if she coined I doubt she coined it, but the invisible labor that sometimes moms do of all the thinking and all the planning and all of this stuff that you don't see, that's not necessarily like, how it's not vacuuming, right? So some people wouldn't even know that it was happening, or same could be said for vacuuming. But yeah, there's a lot of mental gymnastics and thinking through all the details of parenting. And that brings me to my next question. So let's time travel from my life with a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old and go to your life with a 9 and 11. Is that right?
Yeah. Wow. Like we're in puberty, Hillary. It's
what crazy. Is happening? What is that like? We don't have to necessarily talk about puberty, but that I can't even.
Yeah, I know.
What have you learned about being a working parent, in the years that have transpired since infanthood and since little kids and moving into, life with
next phase?
Almost teenagers. Yeah. Like you're heavily in preteen territory, I think.
Yes, I am. Yeah. So I had one thought that just came to me about your prior question that I'm going to get out before I answer this question, which is I recently learned the reframe around sort of this guilt of, oh, I should be doing this and I'm doing this, which is to tell yourself, not I'm feeling guilty about X, but I made this choice because. So when you go to the doctor's appointment, I made this choice because I wanted to be there on my son's first birthday. I made this choice, and then maybe you're working the afternoon and then you're not with him at dinner. I made this choice because I spent the morning with him and now I need to get my work done. And I just find that to be a calming reframe. Okay, so what is life like 9 and 11 years in? So first of all, I would note that it is so much less physically demanding on us, right? I don't have to worry that they're going to fall down the stairs. I do not wipe butts anymore, right? Like there are so many physical things that are different. My husband and I hesitate to say this to a mom with a 1 and a 3.5-year-old, but we sleep in on the weekends and our children make themselves like they go get something to eat and they like every Saturday morning, they know it's their chore to unload the dishwasher. So they're like becoming useful around the house. Like they wash their own dinner dishes. My husband was out of town last week and golly gee, if the kids didn't do a lot more than they usually do, which put me on notice that they're capable of doing a lot more than I asked them to. So I just say like the physical demands have changed. The emotional demands are more complex. Like the who's friends with whom and who's getting into arguments with whom and like peer groups and social issues and mental health, quite frankly, is a totally different ball game now that they're older. And I'd say now that we're moving into sort of, my son will be at middle school next year. And that blows my mind. And this past week, my oldest son just went away for the first time on a 2-night overnight trip. His whole 5th grade public school class went, out to Virginia to a nature place for 2 nights. And there was a letting go for me in that. I have friends whose kids have gone away for like 3 weeks and 6 weeks summer camps and whatever. My kids haven't done that yet. They just haven't wanted to. They're not ready. But I realized that there's a being ready on the parent side too. I feel like, parenthood is just a continuous process of letting go. And for me, this is, the letting go, to have my kid go to middle school and like walk there on his own is a big deal, across a busy BC city street. And I love this phase. Like, they're so interesting and they're so fun. And last year we took a car trip from Washington, D.C. all the way across the country and back. We did 8,153 miles in our minivan, in part because there's a federal program that allows all fourth graders free access to all the national parks. So we planned it to go see a whole bunch of national parks while my older son was in fourth grade. And we couldn't have done that, or we wouldn't have enjoyed doing that when our kids were really tiny. So I'm enjoying the freedom and excitement that comes with having older kids. And there are days when it is seriously much more mentally mentally challenging than some of the physical challenges of the earlier years.
That's so fascinating. And with mindful return, at this point, is mindful return your sort of, I hate to say main thing.
Yeah.
At some point it was a side hustle, but now it's your main thing. Are you still practicing law as well?
Yes. So mindful return just turns 8 years old next month, which is so exciting to me. My third child, as I call it. And I was a partner at a law firm called Denton's up until last summer. I left the partnership of Denton's last summer to make mindful return my main gig. And I am practicing law as my side hustle, so to speak.
Dreams.
I have my own law firm and, still have clients from when I was at the firm. And it is probably 25 to 35% of my week is the law, and the rest of it is mindful return. We have, I think, 86 different employers that offer mindful return courses as a parental leave benefit. And we have chapters in UK and South Africa and India now. And it's just sort of exploded organically in a way that I am truly loving and enjoying. And I'm happy I made this shift.
It's incredible. So I'm sure that I have listeners, a lot of my listeners, we all kind of have like side hustles or passion projects or things that we dream about doing or things that we are doing, whether it's for compensation or not.
Yeah.
But a lot of them would probably love to kind of like make that flip, sort of like you did, like make their responsible day job become their sort of side hustle and get to really focus on the thing that like lights them up the most all the time. So for you, was it a strategic like 8-year on-ramp to making that flip, or like how did that happen? What would your advice be to people who would like to do something like that?
Yeah, I think there is a common misperception that you just have to throw it all away and give up the day job and, go all in. And that just isn't me personally. It's not my personality. It didn't feel right for the financial stability of our family. And it just terrified me too much, right? Because I'm a risk averse lawyer, as I said earlier. So for me, it was more of a gradual process over time. For the first year and a half of mindful return, I was doing it 20 minutes a night. And whenever I would go on a work trip, I would have like, oh my gosh, 3 hours on an airplane, I can work on mindful return. And then a year and a half in, I said to myself, I want some daylight hours to actually work on this. And then I really surprised myself by applying for it and going back to a job at a law firm, which I swore I would never do, but I entered the partnership of the law firm on a 60% schedule. And, I was able to create that role in a practice group where they had people on that type of schedule before. And so for about 5 years, I did the 60% law, 40% mindful return. The last year that I was at the firm, or the last year and a half, I scaled that back to 50%. So I was at the firm for 50%. And then, last summer is when I did the switch. Right prior to the pandemic, someone had asked me sort of what my plan was. And I said something like, oh, well, within the next 5 to 10 years, I want mindful return to really be my main gig. The pandemic completely accelerated that. I mean, about a year into the pandemic, I was definitely in that position of being like, why am I waiting? And P.S., employers need help with their parents right now. And so I was sort of well positioned to be able to make the switch more rapidly than I thought I was going to. But I don't view anything as an on or off. I view it all as sort of a glide into the next thing that makes sense.
Totally. And question for you. So you said
Mhm.
that you were working full time and then you did 60% and then 50%. What I'm
Mhm.
hearing is that you're a person who sets boundaries and you do a good job at delineating, because I think
Yeah.
some people, they move into a quote unquote part-time role, but then they're still doing full-time work. So any tips on setting boundaries at work so work really fits around your life as opposed to the other?
Yeah, I have lots of thoughts on this. First of all, I had the advantage of having left the place of employment where I was full time and going to another organization and starting there on a 60% schedule. There is something about how people know you and the expectations that you've set that can sometimes be hard. And for me, no one knew me as a full time worker at the new place. And so from the outset, I was able to say, hi, I'm Lori, and I'm only here 60% of the time. And that was just sort of the given. In terms of setting boundaries, I do entire workshops on boundary setting, but just a couple of thoughts. Brené Brown's quote, choose discomfort over resentment, is my favorite mantra to rely on in the boundary setting space. She acknowledges in that quote that boundary setting is not going to be comfortable. It may get easier over time, but it often feels hard, right? And it feels hard because it's hard to say no to people and it's hard to not meet everyone's expectations all the time. And for me, it is better to feel that discomfort of saying no and setting the boundary than to feel the resentment of having chosen the thing that I didn't want to choose. I know it's easier said than done. I think boundary setting has three parts. One, identifying that you need the boundary. Two, actually articulating it. And three, reestablishing it when it breaks down. And so I think for each individual, you need to sit there and say, okay, where do I need the boundary? Where do I not have it right now? If I were to put one in place, what would it look like? How can I articulate it? For a long time, my evening boundary was I will not be on my phone between 5 and 8 p.m. Right? I'm not going to check email between 5 and 8. If there's an emergency, call me. But otherwise, like that is my sacred family time. And, with like one or two exceptions, people left me alone. And one or two, like over the course of many years. And then they knew that at 8 o'clock, I would get back on and take care of whatever they needed. So what was I saying? Oh, right. So articulate the boundary, and then inevitably the boundary will break down. People will step on your boundaries, right? You are the only person who can enforce your boundaries. Other people aren't going to say, oh, Hillary, let me help you enforce your boundaries. No, what incentive do they have to do that? So I think we need to be the one to reset them. And if someone continuously refuses to accept the boundary, then we really have to think about whether we want to keep interacting with that person or not. It's hard. It's complicated. That's a messy subject, Hillary, but it's a really important one for working parents.
Yeah, but I love what you said, choose discomfort over resentment. I'm
That's
gonna,
Brené Brown. Yeah.
yes, Brené
Mm-hmm.
Brown. I'm gonna keep that one up here.
Yeah.
Lori, thank you so much for being with us today. Tell
Yeah.
the listeners where they can find you online.
Sure. So we're on all the usual social media channels. Find us on Instagram at Mindful Return. You can link in with me, Lori Mihalich Levin. Just say that you heard me on Hillary's podcast, and I'd be happy to accept your LinkedIn invitation. We're on Facebook at Mindful Return. You can go to www.mindfulreturn.com to learn more about our courses and programs in our community. We have a weekly newsletter that comes out every Saturday called Saturday Secrets, where you can get a tip and find out, what our latest blog post is. I co-host the Parents at Work podcast, so you can look that up in all the places you get a podcast. And finally, head on over to Amazon and you can find Back to Work After Baby, my book.
That's right. All right. Thank you, Lori.
Thanks.